Beautiful. We are live. Kara-Leah, thank you so much for joining me all the way from Canada. How are
hmm
you today?
Oh my God, I'm buzzing. Like it's very hard to sit still, so I might end up bouncing around on my ball a little bit.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm very much the same, so we can both do that. Um,
Yeah.
it'd be awesome if you could just describe what it is that you do and
Hmm.
what you might be most well known for.
Hmm. Ah, hmm. What I do, oh my goodness, how to summarize it. I live the path of awakening and liberation via the teachings of traditional Tantra. And through living that path, like really applying the teachings and the practices to my daily life, I then take that applied living and transmit it through whatever I'm bringing into the world, whether it's a training, a retreat, a workshop, a class, a book, a podcast, whatever medium. The big thing for me, though, is living the path itself.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Mm,
And here we are, it's 2025, and
I
it's looking more
know.
like a Black Mirror episode every day. It's getting crazy out there. How important is it for people who realize they're on some kind of path of unfolding, of awakening, of healing and growth? Like, how important is it for people to start some kind of mind, body, or breath practice in your mind?
Well, I'd say if you're not doing that, you're not even on the path,
I
right?
agree. Please
Yeah,
expand on that.
totally. So practice is the path. That's one of the first things. But also recognize that practice without view teachings can be highly ineffective. And so view teachings are understanding the worldview within which you're operating. And most of us, our default worldview is consumer capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, colonialism, all of that, right?
Mhm.
And when we come into so called spirituality, a lot of that is still running us. And so we approach spirituality unconsciously through that particular lens, which can be incredibly extractive, very individualized. Um, yeah, all the things. And so getting really clear on the worldview within which you're operating is super important. So, for example, when I first started on the path, like one of my first books I ever read was The Celestine Prophecy back in the early
Mm.
90s. And, it's a really good example of New Age spirituality that's not particularly grounded in a specific worldview, but is offering a way to see things. And then I discovered classical yoga. So and that's far more robust in terms of a worldview that goes back thousands of years, that's been road tested by very dedicated practitioners, gurus, teachers, masters over the years. And then I discovered classical or traditional Tantra. And when that really landed through practice and view teachings, what was unfolding for me shifted dramatically, and it was just next level. So one of the big things I notice on the path is that people are taking from all of these different traditions, different
Mm.
lineages, like this mishmash mash up of new age spirituality, which is then infused with consumer capitalism and patriarchy and all of that, and it's just a hot mess, really.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like that's such a massive key. My root teacher Tachin, this is a Buddhist tradition, he says
hmm
if we have a vast view and then we enter into meditation, we can have a vast awakening. And like what you're pointing to with this, the view, the understanding, the philosophy behind the practice, the kind of
Yeah.
foundation of the practice. Um, you had a piece of writing years ago that I remember. I saw it on one of your statuses. I'm not sure if you'll recall it or not, but I found it really interesting and it always stuck with me. You said, and I'll just round it out to how I can explain it. You said, "Here I am trying to teach all these people about liberation, and I'm realizing that most of them don't really want liberation." What- and I, and I think you said like what they really want is to feel better about themselves, to be more successful, and to have better relationships. And I
Mm.
wish that they would stay on this path of awakening because you'll realize that you'll actually get all those things once you really jump onto that path. Um, I'm wondering if you still agree with that and if you could expand on this notion.
Mm. Yeah, I do think that it's definitely still holds water, and that most people are using the teachings in order to get or attain something,
Yeah.
whether it is, yeah, feeling better about themselves, like the whole self-love thing, or becoming more successful, or being more secure, or finding the perfect partner, etc. And that's not really what the actual spiritual path is about. It can be sometimes a side benefit, but not always, right? Not always. Like, like I follow a lot of different coaches and mentors on Instagram, and this whole thing about, if I've done this and made all this money and you can do it too, it's like, well, yes, and sometimes it's just not our karma,
Mm,
you
mm.
know? Yeah. So I think getting really clear about what you're looking for is useful, because you may not actually give a shit about awakening and liberation, which will demand everything of you. You may actually just want to find a really good somatic therapist, and that's totally okay.
Yeah.
Or a really good business coach or a career mentor. Yeah.
I love how you're making this distinction between, people just wanting to create a better, happier life for themselves
Hmm.
and what we're talking about with real liberation and a real spiritual path. Um, the first noble truth is like life is suffering, and you have to get around to how tricky your mind is, constantly grasping onto stories and constantly pushing things away. And this is all going on, and unless we develop some kind of not only mastery of the mind, but being able to see the nature of mind and actually
Mm,
developing that awareness of the of the awareness behind the thoughts and the stories, and literally be able to like expand that space behind it all, where you can rest into something a lot
yeah.
bigger. And 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 I think a lot of people, if you don't get that, then we do just kind of go from one story to a better story to a better story. And
That.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And it's like I've got the right story now, I'm good. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like we there's a constant dying that needs to happen. There's a constant non-clinging awareness that's so
Mm,
valuable as a ground, as a foundation. And I feel like where people are now, I think it's really important that we have powerful practices,
mm,
because somebody might have an inkling that, yeah, I really need to start meditation. I think it'd be really good for me. I mean, there's a mountain of science that says it's really good for me. And I'm going to look on YouTube, or I'm going to like do this or that. And it didn't work for me because it didn't resonate or whatever. And again, we're missing so many key points of like having a good teacher, or
yeah.
having a teacher that's actually connected with a lineage,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
what that can really do. I was wondering if you could speak to
Mm,
that, the I guess the beauty or the power in having a
mm,
good teacher. What's your
mm-hmm.
experience of that, and maybe a little bit about lineage as well?
Yeah. There's so much in what you just said, and a couple of points on that first. One, there is nothing, and there's nothing wrong with going from a story to a better story to a better story to a better
Yep,
story.
love
And
to
you
hear.
weren't suggesting there was. I just want to really point that out to people. It's just recognizing that spirituality is about awakening from the dream of who you think you are. It's about
Mm,
ultimate liberation and freedom. And in the tantric lineages, there is the three fruits of the path, which are experienced via view, teachings, and practice. These things have to align, is awakening, liberation, and the enjoyment of life, right? So
mm,
it's part and
mm.
parcel, but awakening and liberation is always, always preeminent, right? You don't chase the enjoyment per se. The awakening and liberation leads to the unfolding, but you also work with that. And so, one of the aspects I think is really important to understand is that often the way Western spirituality functions, like capitalism and white supremacy, etc., is very extractive. So it extracts meditation out of the lineage, out of the view teachings, and then co-opts it into becoming a productivity tool where you can get more out of your workers, and completely misses the point that the very function of meditation is to ultimately point you to that which you are, which is not a person. it's it's awareness, right?
Yeah.
And so instead we have these this like reinforcement of the hyper individualism in service to capitalism, co-opting the practice of meditation. So that's the whole thing, right?
Mm,
Now, what you're saying around teacher
mm,
is that if you have not had a direct transmission or direct experience of what it's like to no longer identify as a person, as a story of me, then how on earth can you even know it's a thing or recognize that that's part of the path? And so there's so many teachers out there. You can only teach people, take students as far as you have gone. And we have seen this mass watering down of the quality of teachers
mm,
because of things like, again, the capitalist model. Like no shade at all on yoga studios or yoga teachers. The yoga studio as a business model is fundamentally broken and flawed. So people launch yoga teacher trainings in order to make it sustainable, which then churns out and generates all of these teachers that may not have even had a home practice before they signed up for teacher training, who have no direct experience of any aspect of awakening and liberation, who are then teaching other people yoga, but it becomes more and more limited what they're teaching because they just don't know. They just don't
mm,
know. So to your question, it is fundamental to find teachers who are as close to the source as possible, whether they are living in person teachers or whether they are teachers that have passed, like Neem Karoli Baba, for example, who was the guru of Ram Dass, right? Richard Alpert. Um, and both of those kind of teachers can be very beneficial because when you work with a teacher, you're stepping into their field. There is a
mm,
transmission that occurs. And so you can begin to sense or taste what it's like to be them. And they are living from a more expanded experience of what it means to be human, which is beyond the identification with the limited sense of self. And within that as well, when you work with a teacher who is within a lineage, it's like this stream of consciousness that goes back centuries that has this palpable, like, feel. Like one of my teachers was Shiva Ray, who's freaking amazing. Like I had oh my God, the honor of studying with her in 2010 and then again in 2016 in person and online. And she really, like, her lineage would go back through Krishnamacharya, for example, and beyond that. And so there's this stream. I mean, she has many because she studies with lots of different teachers, but there is a direct felt sense of that stream, of the sense of being held, where the transmissions of the teachings come through, not just when you're interacting with the teacher, but quite often in the yogic world through dreams, for example,
oh
right?
wow,
It's
yeah.
Yeah, it's a thing for these teachers to show up and guide through dreams. Um, and so critical, it's absolutely critical to find teachers as close to source as possible. Another teacher I just want to reference here is Christopher Wallace, who spent time at an ashram, right, in the Muktananda lineage, and also is able to read the tantric texts. And he's an incredible scholar practitioner. So receiving teachings from him is coming through the texts themselves, which are written by awakening or awakened, possibly even gurus and teachers. So again, it's very
Mm,
close to source. Here's this text now being read, commentated on, interpreted by someone who understands Sanskrit, is well trained in this. So it's as close as you can get, you see. So critical, so critical.
oh, I
Yeah,
love it. I love that you went there. I was going to ask about like a deeper understanding of transmission, but that was so well
yeah,
articulated. And I've experienced this as well. And when I look back on my path, I feel a lot of gratitude, and I can feel how I must have really good karma to have actually come across a true master. And especially within for me, the Tibetan Buddhist realms,
mm,
there's a lot of magic. There's a lot of stuff that happens in the circle, in the sangha, that doesn't get talked about because it doesn't
yeah,
need to be talked about. It's like you either got the transmission or you didn't, and it either helped you or it didn't. But the
uh-huh,
skillful speech is happening in the actual teaching, and we're not going to talk about all the other stuff that's in the subtle realms. But I've had these incredible experiences that just completely changed my perception on what's possible and what I
Mm-hmm.
am and what
Mm-hmm.
reality is. And
Uh-huh.
and actually meeting somebody who not only articulates the spiritual path so well and
Mm.
somehow is able to speak to everyone in the circle effortlessly without any questions being asked, and
Yeah. It's the
and also
field.
that's right, and also has this deep lineage that goes all the way back to Shakyamuni Buddha. And it's like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
this is really powerful. And like you said, you have a lot of gratitude for
Yeah.
like the teachers that you've had. So for these people that maybe don't have a teacher like that or haven't found a really powerful teacher like that, what would you say are some of the other like more potent practices that people can maybe take up that are gonna like give an experience? And I'm also bringing, there's also a consideration around, are people ready for powerful practices, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But what
Yeah.
comes up for you as far as like, look, somebody's looking for some kind of practice, like what are some of the things that can really move the needle as far as your spiritual practice?
Hmm. I would even step back another step and just really clarify what the desire is. Like, is the desire to
Mm,
have a better, easier, more comfortable life? Then might not, spirituality might not be the thing, right? But if your desire is freedom, like real freedom, right? And liberation and awakening, then yes, finding, how to find I think the first thing is finding the lineage or the tradition that really calls to you, that lights you up. Like for me, it was definitely yoga. And then that clarified into tantric yoga. Like the teachings of classical yoga are very different from the teachings of traditional tantra, right? One is a transcendent, and the other is a very embodied. One is more like you withdraw from society, and the other is very much about being a householder, which of course suits us. So
mm,
it's finding the tradition, the lineage, which is the view teachings, because yeah, the practices. What comes first, the practice or the view teachings? For me, it came together. Like I really encountered Tantra when I first studied with Shiva Ray, and she had Christopher Tompkins come and teach Tantra on her teacher training. And he gave us both the tantric view teachings and a specific tantric practice, uchara. And whilst I didn't really get the view teachings then, I got the practice and I began
mm,
to regularly do that practice. And that doing that practice for as long as I did, eventually I was like, I really need to understand the view within which this practice is delivered, you know. So I guess what I'm saying is get clear on your desire and then
yeah,
follow your curiosity. What lights you up and kind of like what do you have access to, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
You touched on Tantra and you already kind of gave an explanation on Tantra, but I'd love it if you could just give a little bit more of an encapsulation, like what is Tantra? Because I think a lot of people think it's something to do with liberation and other people think it's something to do with sex and desire.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
expand on that?
Yeah. So traditional tantra is, oh my goodness, how do I? The texts of traditional Tantra started to appear around 500 AD, but the roots go way back, and it is very difficult. The roots go all the way back to shamanism, back to the Vedas, etc. So we are, in the area of India and around there, and it's very much about embodied liberation, right? So
Mm,
awakening to that
mm,
which you are, awareness, knowing yourself as awareness, essence, nature, Shiva consciousness, and liberating. So digesting and dissolving the conditioning, the karma, the samskaras, the unresolved trauma, etc., and enjoying life. And Tantra has all of these texts. And one thing I like to say is that if the teaching of the practice is not in a tantric text, is it really Tantra, right? And then in the early 20th century, so we're talking like 1906 in San Francisco, of course, it was San Francisco. I can't remember his name, Bernard Pierre or Pierre Bernard or someone like that. He bumped into an immigrant from Bengali who had some tantric teachings, kind of
mm,
like learned a few. I think he might have known Aleister Crowley, who was a magician and
Yep.
practitioner of the occult, etc. There was this mishmash, and out of that arose what became neo-tantra, which is very much focused on sexuality, conscious sexuality, and kind of a mishmash, and takes from some of the teachings of Tantra, but is really narrowly focused, because like traditional Tantra did have some rituals related to sexuality, right? But they were nothing like what we see in Neo-Tantra today. I don't know if you want me to go in depth on the comparison there, but Neo-Tantra, the roots of the early 20th century, traditional Tantra, the roots go way back, way, way, way
Yeah.
back. And it began appearing in tantric texts in around 500 AD. And it's a very different thing. And that, the work of Neo-Tantra is incredibly important and necessary, like conscious sexuality. It's amazing, but just not to confuse it with traditional Tantra. Yeah.
Yeah, well said, and thank you for that detailing on the traditional version of that. I love that, and it's interesting when we think about also carving out a beautiful life for ourselves while we're
Yeah.
doing the shadow work, while we're attuning to higher frequencies and stuff. It feels like such a massive key that if you're not doing that, it's almost like you're going to have a really hard time unnecessarily, and you're not honoring your humanity. And I wouldn't mind just almost like talking about desire a little bit, because desire
Yeah.
is such a paradox, right? Because so many teachings
Mm.
are like, desire is going to fuck you up. Desire is going to be this thing that I'm grasping for, and I'm grasping for it, and then I get it, and then, uh, it didn't give me the
Yeah.
lasting wholeness and satisfaction that I wanted. So now I'm on to the next thing. But I think what you're saying is like, almost everything we do is out of desire. And if we can
Yeah.
get to that intention of like, well, my desire is to awaken speedily for the sake of all beings and experience
Mm-hmm.
love and union, then also what else is emerging like on top of that is the desire. Like, I don't even know if
Mm.
there's a question in there, but I'm just throwing
Yeah.
stuff out there.
I think there's a discernment around, I think the Buddhist teaching is attachment to desire. Attachment to desire is the source of suffering, not desire itself, but attachment to desire. Because
Mm,
as you point out, it's desire that allows us to live. If you didn't desire to drink or eat, you would die very quickly. Like that's the truth of it. With
true.
no appetite, you just die. And so as animals, and this is important to recognize too, that we are animals, so there's a lot of instinctual drives that are happening there. And then there's been the development of the neocortex, which is a whole other thing. So the teachings from a tantric perspective are that desire is what you follow, but with real discernment, right?
Mm,
So you're constantly burning attachment to desire or projection into desire. Because, yeah, I mean, it's desire to practice, the desire to liberate, desire to awaken. And the teaching is that all desire is ultimately all longing from the heroin addict, shooting up in the back alley, right? All the way through to the monk showing up for practice at 3 a.m. in the morning. All desire is ultimately a longing to immerse in God
mm.
or to know yourself as God, you
Oh
see?
wow, I love that. I love that.
Yeah, it just
Um,
gets expressed like the heroin addict, it's a very limited expression. But if you can see it through that lens and recognize, oh, what's driving this person is they just want to lose the identification with the separate sense of self and all the suffering that that engenders and know themselves as God, full immersion. And there's more beneficial, less destructive ways in which to honor that desire.
Absolutely. It reminds me of a quote I heard once: when the truth is being searched for, it's the intensity of the longing that does all the work.
Yeah,
So it's like, actually,
absolutely.
yeah, there is an intensity there. There is a
Mm-hmm.
intensity of desire with discernment, like you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for
yeah.
that. Um,
One more
you,
thing on that,
yeah,
actually.
yeah, yeah.
So with desire, what's really useful, so there's a teaching in the Recognition Sutras that goes something along the lines of, in the fire of awareness, the kindling of all knowable objects burns up. And what that's pointing to is that if we are undertaking a behavior or action, if we are orientated to awareness, if we know ourselves as awareness while we are taking the action, right, then we begin to really burn up the root, like the karmic turning of the wheel as such, the root that's giving rise to that action, and we will liberate in the process. So a good example is if there is a desire to eat a whole packet of chocolate biscuits, you can, ignore the fact that you're doing it. You can numb out, you can distract while you do it. You can send yourself unconscious, or you can become really aware and go, I'm going to take this action with full awareness and sense and feel every single aspect of it and be as awake to the fullness of this experience as possible. And that alignment completely changes what then unfolds.
I love that. I'm just imagining like I am the whole universe eating this chocolate bar, you know,
Totally.
which is
Yeah. And
so much better
yeah,
than shame and guilt, right? It's so much better than shame and guilt.
which is a really good example of the way that the holdover from Christian conditioning, that
Yeah.
worldview, is then like corrupting the spiritual path. Because if you've really imbibed the worldview of Tantra and that behavior is happening, full awareness, own it completely, attune, sensory. You see how the worldview informs the action, which
Yeah,
then changes the outcome of the action, which is why the view teachings and knowing how to live them is critical.
absolutely.
Mm,
You have a really interesting story around your initial awakening experience and your kundalini experience. I wondered if you could give me
yeah.
like even just a brief detailing, take us on a journey of like that experience for you and what that was like.
Mm, yeah. It started in 2000. I was in Maui, Hawaii, and doing past life regression with a healer. And my body started to spontaneously jerk and move. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? And then when I walked out of that session, the world was different. I felt like I was on the cleanest, most incredible MDMA ever. It was like, holy, and it was because, like I was like, whoa. And after that, what I noticed was there was movement up the spine. It would like kind of go like this and would hit something and there'd be a popping, like a really subtle pop, and it would drop back down. I didn't know what it was at the time, and it just, that kept happening for about 4 years. And then I was at Shambhala Festival. Love that name, right? It comes from the Buddhist
Yeah,
traditions,
yeah.
right? And massive, big shift in perception. I'm not going to say it's not an experience that I had. It was a shift in perception of reality, and the I thought I was briefly disappeared. And it was combined with a whole lot of unresolved trauma and challenging relationship stuff and certain functionings of my psyche that basically led me into psychosis and the acute psych ward at Lionsgate Hospital in Vancouver. And
Wow.
and when I woke up in the hospital, right back identified with conditioned mind. However, I had the reference point
Yes.
and I had touched upon this experience. It's not an experience; it's a paradigm shift, and that had unfolded, and so I really doubled down on my practice and on my study, knowing that there's a paradigm shift that unfolds here, and so that was in 2004. So the next like 21 years have very much been about the really difficult work of liberation, which in my case has involved an enormous amount, like Christopher Wallace calls it, strip mining karma, where the deepest samskaras, unresolved emotional patterns is one way, or past impressions, come up in order to be devoured, digested, and dissolved.
Mm,
And it's
mm.
been pretty fucking awful, and also like, wow. It's
Yeah, totally
like
worth it, right?
oh my god, like this reality is, yeah, the continuity, like, it's like I find myself comparing it to, being on things like mushrooms or MDMA, but it's like, being on mushrooms where there's that sense of continuity and the trees are alive, and it's like, because it's like the whole of reality is this pulsing,
Mm,
alive, awake reality that it's constantly in a call and response relationship with
mm.
us. Um, yeah, and so that's been the journey, has been to do the challenging work of showing up to the digestion process, knowing what that paradigm shift is like, and then forgetting and being back in identification with conditioned mind, and then the remembering, and in this kind of pulsation between the forgetting and the remembering, the concealment and the revelation, you could say.
Absolutely. And maybe you could speak to kundalini for people that maybe have like a certain
Mm,
view around it, that as I've heard some people speak of it like it's a bad thing, and like my experience has been when it's happened to me, it's been spontaneous. It's
yeah,
been I spent a lot of time working with the chakras. I did a lot of like hatha yoga. I went through different phases of doing different practices. We talked about transmission, and I've had these experiences where the kundalini starts shooting up the spine, and my intuition has just been to trust that the
yeah,
energy knows what to do, and
yeah,
that I have an energy body that is part of me, whether it's you call it the pranamaya kosha or whatever. It's like, and the kundalini is, from my understanding, it's a natural part of this multi-dimensional human vessel that we're piloting around. Like,
mm,
could you maybe speak a little bit into that around like what is
yeah,
kundalini and like what's important for people to know?
yeah. I mean, there's a subtle thing there in terms of, like you said, I have an energy body. And it's like, well, no, because there's no I to have the thing.
True.
Right. And but I know it's like it's a
Yep.
like a familiar construct of language. There is, there is an energy body would be another way to frame it. And
Mm.
again, we're looking through the particular lens or the worldview of yoga, of Tantra, of Buddhism, which are very interwoven. Like Tibetan Buddhism, for example, was incredibly influenced by Tantra, and
Yes.
some of the teachings of Tantra, the tantric lineages, are actually Tibetan Buddhism. Like they're not; these things are not separate, you could say.
Mm.
So Kundalini as a word, as a signifier, has come to mean so many different things, and it's almost nonsensical now. But originally, like the first time that that word is used in a text is around 700 AD in a particular tantric text. So as a way of objectifying a phenomena, it comes from the tantric lineages, and because hatha yoga is not is grounded in tantra more so than classical yoga, it weaves into hatha yoga, and the way that it's described, it's the goddess. It's like
Mm.
it's the infinite intelligence of the universe expressing through the form of energy, and it's always awake. Kundalini, she is
Mm.
always awake, but we awaken to her. And so when we begin to awaken to her, things like feeling the spontaneous movement, and when that begins to happen, the spontaneous movement, it will seek out to do the purification process. So it will be purifying us of all of the samskaras and karmas that have built up over potentially lifetimes or through the ancestors, etc. And the manifestation of the purification process can sometimes be really awful to the apparent individual, to the person, right? Like ending up
Mm.
in a psych ward. Now, that's
Yeah.
not because of Kundalini, that's because of the samskaras and the karmas, etc., that were unfolding within me, and what the purification process ended up looking like, you see.
You went
So,
straight to the deep end, eh?
yeah, that was, yeah.
Yeah.
So Kundalini is it's beautiful and it's amazing, and once we awaken to it, the challenge is to really learn how to support or surrender, not even support, she doesn't need our support, but more to surrender and get out of the way and just allow what is happening, rather than going into the control and manage and manipulate mode of the apparent separate individual sense of self, right? Mm.
Absolutely. I love how you were speaking to how these different traditions, they're not really separate, you know. It's
Mm.
like these incredible masters basically attempting to articulate consciousness and the
Mhm.
human being's relationship with the cosmos, right? And these incredible masters did a great job of creating
Mm.
these blueprints for awakening. And one of the things that has helped illuminate that for me was, you mentioned psychedelics, and Again, I've been really lucky to find some really authentic shaman who have taken me
Hmm.
on really powerful journeys, and that illuminated how important the Eastern philosophies are, and how
Mm.
that mastery of the mind is so important. And
Yeah.
otherwise, in that experience, you get slapped around so much, and
Uh-huh.
you can really end up in some kind of multi-dimensional nightmare. Whereas the ability to just stabilize
Mm.
yourself and actually just receive all the information that's coming in and all the healing that wants to happen. But you also see how much is under the rug, and you get to see this huge, like, whoa, there's a lot going on under here. Like, wow, there is so much conditioning and trauma and partial views, and I'm seeing it in such a, like, the unconscious is so vast. It's such a,
Yeah.
like, anyone who thinks, oh, I don't really have any healing to do, it's like you have no idea how deep the well goes, and you're shown that. And then and that has really also been another huge shift in my own journey, was having that realization and having that experience. And I guess what it brings up for me is like, we have to consider that as a teacher, as a coach, as a transformational mentor, when working with someone. I know that's part of your work, is to work with people one on one. As a, I don't know if you
Yeah.
call it a transformational coach or what the language is, but how do you approach people? How do you approach the transformational journey?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
I call myself a mentor or a
Mm,
guide. And yes, I work one-on-one with people or small group containers, etc. And the big thing for me is that I meet people where they are. And
I love
so
that thing too. Yeah.
how I work depends so vastly upon what that person is bringing to the table and what their desire is. Like, I'm led by their desire. And what I notice is some people will sign up to work with me, and their desire is actually safety and comfort, right?
Mm.
And sometimes, yeah, it'll be fascinating. I'll work with 3 or 4 people in a week, and just seeing how stuck some people can be, because that's what they're actually ultimately choosing. And it's not up to me, it's not my thing to try and shift them or move them or give them an experience or take them anywhere. It's like, no, you choose, and all I can do is offer. And there's a real subtlety in that, because it means I need to let go of being anything, right? And I need to let go of attaining any kind of result with anybody. Because if I'm attached to results, then that completely corrupts what's unfolding, you see.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's what makes it different from, say, coaching, for example. I'm not here to get results. I'm,
Mm.
I'm here to support you into the deepest truth of what and who you are. And a lot of that is trauma resolution. And that's an incredible process. But even then, some people are in resistance. So my role then is to be very gentle and invitational, and to find ways to kind of speak to that resistance that allows that person's soul to speak or to move around the resistance in the mind, in essence, to keep pointing out that's a story of the mind. Or what if? I use a lot of questions, a lot of inquiry. What if this?
Awesome.
What would that feel like? What about this? How about this? Which then means the person has the ability to step in. And as soon as I say, what would it feel like? Da da da. I can tell by how the person responds what's going on, like you say, on all the different levels, right? Because some people would suddenly drop in and go, oh my God, it feels like this. And other people won't even attempt to drop in. They'll just go into the mind and start talking from the mind, and be in the past or be in the future. And like, it's endlessly fascinating work, I have to say. Yeah.
I love that perspective on mentoring. It's very liberating as someone who does similar work. And I do work in a similar way, where there's this understanding of the subconscious programming and the bad programming that a lot of people have, and being stuck in the stories, and not so much trying to grab the story and rewrite it, but trying to like get under it and see through the lies of it. And I love how you ask a lot of questions and stuff. And
Yeah.
but I guess when you see someone who you can tell is stuck in some old programming, and maybe there's still a lot of pain there.
Yeah.
Maybe there's still a lot of like wounding there where it's like, yes, there's a program running. We know that that's an old story and we kind of need to give that love or whatever, but it's really hard for them to move in that direction. It's really hard for them to look at it. Like, what's your approach then in those
Mm.
more vulnerable kind of cases?
I orientate to desire in
Mm,
terms of I will be asking the person, what's your desire? What do you desire? And then if they're like, oh, I want to feel like this, I want to experience that. Awesome. Let's move toward that. And again, I work with a lot of embodied inquiry because, if I say to someone, what would it feel like to be at home within your body? And they start to go into it, whatever's in the way will surface. And the moment that something surfaces and it's, on the table in front of us, now it's in the fire of awareness. And that's
mm,
always the first step, orientation to desire and flushing out what's there into the fire of awareness. And so there's a disidentifying from whatever's there because you cannot dissolve what someone is identified with because that is the same as death. And people don't want to die in general, right?
yeah, that's right. Beautiful.
So the separation out from identification, the critical piece, that's again led by desire.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It reminds me of a holistic meditation that I have. It was written by a guy in Canada, actually, Namgyal Rinpoche, and it's about recalling memories, past
Mm-hmm.
memories, and there's multiple ways you can do this meditation, and you can recall positive memories, you can
Mm-hmm.
recall negative memories or places you were stuck. But he mentions that you should do the positive ones twice as much as you do the negative ones because
Mm.
we skip past it, right? Like when life is going well, it's almost like there's this flow and we forget to like stop and enjoy the journey, and even just doing it for myself and going into like maybe some of the hard relationships that I've had and some of the really like, just hard, you know, situations in life that I almost have like a negative cloud in my memory around that person or that time, and then actually being like, oh wow, there was so many incredible memories there. And that's so healing as well, to realize the good and to balance the light and the dark when working with the unconscious, with the subconscious. So yeah,
Mm.
I really love that approach. I think it's tricky work. Like you said, meeting someone where they are. Mm,
Yeah. And one of the tricky things, right, from the tantric perspective, there isn't positive, negative, there isn't good or bad. There
mm,
is only what happened. And then there isn't even just what happened, there is what happened and the story, how we related to it, the way we perceived what happened. And so a lot of what we're doing in this work is beginning to recognize the perception of what happened and dissolve that perception. Um, and one of the biggest challenges I do find is, when I'm working with people, is starting to dissolve the good, bad, right, wrong, positive, negative frame that
mm.
most Westerners project onto the thing. Because the moment you're like, oh, this is positive or this is negative, there is an inherent aversion or attachment that gets embedded in there. And the liberation from suffering comes about from dissolving aversion and attachment and being able to be with simply what happened as it is, as it was, whatever it was. So that's why the work is interesting because there's that subtle layer. Like I talk about it from working and from the perspective of working in the relational field. How are we relating to what is unfolding? Because there's that relational piece, which is, often confusion, attachment, or aversion. That's what generates suffering.
Yes.
Mm.
Yep. And it's interesting. It's almost like reverse engineering from a non-dual perspective, and like so many of these traditions have a non-dual lineage, right? Like in Buddhism,
Mm.
it's Dzogchen. I think it's
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Advaita Vedanta in yoga philosophy, which is kind of like the direct path, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
We're just recognizing awareness and like recognizing the
Yeah.
knowing of this moment, and like
Yeah.
in between two thoughts there is a primordial unity that's already
Yeah.
there, and like you as
Well, it's
a
not even in between it. It contains it. It permeates it. Like it is the thing
nice.
which that, right? And Dzogchen is very intertwined with Tantra. And like the lineage that I'm most practice and study in is non-dual Tantric
Mm,
Shaivism, right? So that is the view. And this is not something that I have intellectually. It's my lived experience that there is no good, bad, right, wrong. There is just what is happening,
mm,
how it makes us feel, the stories we generate, how we need to respond, what is needed. And the moment that we begin to orientate to life in that way and we begin to drop the aversion and attachment, there is so much less suffering,
yes.
right? And it's not like it's still a practice. Um, and it's a place of moving from, so it's not an intellectual construct either,
Yeah.
if you
There's
see.
a beautiful. I love that. And there's a meme that's going around that I really like, and it's everybody wants healing until the medicine shows up as discipline. And I'm wondering what your take on discipline is, because my experience has been that things can definitely get easier. I experience more love, more freedom, more autonomy, more
Yeah.
free will. But it requires so much discipline to still stay on this kind of tightrope of life and show up every day on the
Mm.
cushion. Almost the discipline is just doing the practice so I can
Hmm.
maintain that kind of higher stream. Like, does the discipline eventually get easier, or like what's your feeling on the amount of discipline it really takes
Yeah.
to take on the path of
I would
awakening?
say pray for intense suffering, and that is going to give you the springboard for effortless discipline. So we're
Cool.
speaking about discipline, and I remember exactly what I was about to say.
Nice. You're onto it.
Okay. um, so I was fortunate enough to have such intense suffering, right? Basically, because I'd had this glimpse of stepping sideways in reality and knowing what life could be like, and then waking up in a psych ward and being completely identified with conditioned mind again. And the contrast was like heaven and hell. So what that did was it meant that I knew the practices were going to shift me in that paradigm shift again. So I began to practice 3-4 times a week. And then when I began teaching, because of integrity, I knew I had to practice daily, because that's what we do as teachers. Note to all yoga teachers, daily practice. And so that meant daily practice. So that's the first thing is A, lots of suffering helps. B, if you're teaching, there's a commitment to daily practice. But if you're just a regular practitioner, maybe you don't experience that much suffering. It can also help to reframe discipline as devotion,
Mm,
right? We
mm,
become devoted to our practice. And there's a different, you can feel how the energy is
yeah.
different.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for me, I became absolutely devoted to practice. And in 2015, when I started 1,000-day practice of Ujjhara, I was led by curiosity and that intense longing to know how I would experience reality if I showed up to this powerful tantric practice for 1,000 days in a row. So again, it was the longing that helped. And I'd written a book, 40 Days of Yoga, back in 2012, which was basically an exploration of the mechanism of the mind and how resistance functions and how to strategize your way around it so that you are not ruled by the mind when you show up to practice. And
Mm,
so that teaching, that understanding meant that I knew how to skillfully work with the mind. Like I didn't, again, the gift of psychosis. I knew not to believe what my mind said. And the mind is like, oh, I'm too tired. It's 11 o'clock at night. I'm not going to bother practicing. I'm going to do 5 minutes because I said I
yeah.
would, you know? So when it comes to showing up, get my book, 40 Days of Yoga, because it's a workbook. And literally, like, my guarantee is if you do what that book says and you show up to it, you will end up practicing every day for 40 days. Even if it takes a couple of years, it will happen.
Yeah.
Um, and again, it comes down to desire and longing. Do you want to know who you become when you show up to daily practice? Get really curious and, do the thing. I mean, how much time, check your phone stats. How much time do you spend on your phone on a social app? And then
Absolutely.
turn around and try and tell me you don't have time to practice. Fucking bullshit. There is no such thing as not enough time to practice. And I know this because I showed up for practice when I had a newborn baby, when I was working a full-time job, renovating a house, running a website, teaching 6 classes a week. They're working 55-hour weeks, running a business, parenting a teenager. When you prioritize practice as the number one thing in your day, the thing that you make sure happens above all else, no matter what, it will happen. And, right now I'm on day 482 of a daily chanting practice where I chant for an hour a day,
Wow.
which, yeah, when I do chata practice, my commitment there was, minimum 3 minutes a day, but usually it was 11 to 20 minutes, occasionally, an hour to a couple hours. But never have I done a practice before where I sit and I chant for an hour consistently every single. And I didn't even plan to. I was doing a 10-day thing, right? And it felt so amazing. I'm like, I'm just going to keep going. I had no. And then now it's day 482, and it's an hour a day. And I love it.
Yeah.
I'm devoted to it. I love who it makes me, what it turns me into, how it makes me feel. Like I'm chanting to Lakshmi right now, and oh my God, what a blessing! Just what a blessing. Yeah.
I love that.
So
It's such a beautiful talking point for everyone on the path. And
yeah.
I think having that daily practice as well, when you're so committed to it and it's not something you have to think about, it's just every
No.
day I'm on the cushion. I don't, it
Mm-hmm.
actually frees up a lot of space for contemplation because I don't need to think about what am I going to do this morning? Should I practice? Should I not? It's just, there's no question. I just
Yeah.
get to sit down and do my practice. There's a ritual,
Uh-huh.
there's a routine to it, and it actually it's liberating in that structure. There's liberation, right, of the mind and clearing up
Oh my God.
more of the space for
Yeah.
contemplation. Yeah.
So much. So it's like I get to roll out of bed and hang out with God for an hour. Like,
The the chanting is interesting. I've done
mm,
many sadhana where there was chants involved, and then I kind of
mhm.
went away from it. Kind of different practices at different phases of my life. A lot of the time for me, it's kind of like I will just sit long enough to drop into that stillness. I use the chakra system and all kinds of things, but I've recently picked up chanting again, and it was so interesting to
Mm,
feel into my voice. And in Buddhism, there's a concept around purification of speech.
mhm.
And there's something with chanting that's different. There's something going on there with
Yeah.
chanting that's different. Yeah, can you maybe speak to that?
Oh. Well, when I chant, well, it depends. The one I'm doing at the moment, I chant internally. So
Mm,
I'm not
mm,
using the voice. When I was working with Uchara, which also uses Bija mantra, then I was mostly chanting externally. Um, I mean, there are some really vast teachings in Tantra around the voice and the impact of chanting, but I don't know them deeply enough to do them justice. I would butcher them if I would to speak to them. What I do, what can I share that's relevant though? So from direct experience, I began that tantric chant. I started in 2010, did it semi-regularly for 5 years, and then daily from March 2015. And I began teaching 6-day tantric trainings in 2018. And they would start at 7 in the morning with practices and run till about 9 or 10 at night. And I would be leading 100% of the entire time with, short breaks for breakfast, lunch, dinner. So basically, I'm kind of talking for
mm.
anywhere from, we were doing practices, but I would often be giving the Dharma lecture or speaking to things or tuning in. And I would do that with no notes ever at all, and often without an idea of what I was going to speak to, because I just knew that I could drop down and allow the voice to come through. And my feeling is that chanting for so long in Tantra, mantra is the goddess. It is
Mm,
the goddess.
mm,
So when we chant, again, it's that devotion to the goddess, and she begins to, like, the teaching is that she begins to, as part of art, she begins to speak through
Mm.
us. We become an embodied, channel. And I'm not saying that I was her or anything, but there was a purification and an
Yes.
ability to be so still and so quiet and so aligned to awareness that the words that were needed for the students in front of me would just show up. And I knew to trust, to let go. There wasn't a you in the way. Like, oh my God, it's an incredible process. And again, when there's no agenda other than to serve, it just unfolds.
And there's such a safety in that feeling too. There's such a not letting your walls down, to just trust that what needs to be said or what needs to be
Mm-hmm.
done in any moment will happen spontaneously through you. There's like
Yeah.
this grounded connection with reality that I think is so potent. I want to switch it up a little bit. I follow a guy called Eric Godzi, and I think you follow him as
Yeah,
well. And I
I
literally
do.
saw this status yesterday, and I saw that you commented on it, and I thought, man, this is
Mm-hmm.
something I have thought about for a long time, and it's around entities. And
Yeah.
so many people in different communities talk about entities, and there's almost like this over exaggeration of how big of a deal it is, and this kind of like we need to be scared of all the entities that are attaching to people. And I wouldn't mind just reading a little bit of what Eric said, and
Mm-hmm.
and giving you a chance to kind of comment on this, because I thought he was bang on. And
Mm.
he says, you aren't cursed, but you might have a fragmented attentional system that ruminates most of the day. A shaman didn't put a hex on you, but you might not have yet cultivated the courage to claim your desires and communicate your feelings. It isn't an archon or a demon. You might just be ready to confront your shame and grief.
Mm.
What's he speaking
Mm.
into here, and give us your thoughts on quote
Yeah,
unquote entities.
entities. All right. So again, I like to zoom out, context frame. Within the tantric worldview, there are so many non-corporal beings. So we are used to beings that manifest in material form, like you and I, the cat, the dog, the insect, the fish, whatever.
Yeah.
And in Tantra and in Buddhism and as well, it's well known, or the worldview is that there are all kinds of, oh hello, jokes. There are all kinds of like non-corporal beings that are around us. So that's the first thing to understand the context. And then of course within Christianity, like Jesus cast the demons out and they go into the
Mm.
pigs that then drown themselves in the lake and all of that. So in different religions, there's different ways of describing these non-corporal beings. And within indigenous cultures, within shamanism, etc., as well. And so sometimes people are like, is this true? Do these things exist? Do they not exist? And I think the more interesting question is sometimes, well, what's it pointing to and what's required, what's needed.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, I will often see people get really hung up on protection, must protect from this and this, etc. And it is a thing. If you look at the Emerald podcast, Josh did an
Yes.
incredible podcast talking about this. And in Buddhism as well, and in Tantra, there are different protection rituals that you are meant to do when you're working with these with practices in particular, because non-corporal beings, when you do practice, there's a lot of shakti that's being generated, a lot of energy, and non-corporal beings will sometimes come and feed off that. So it's a huge topic, and what Eric is pointing to is this really subtle thing whereby people freak out and become paranoid about needing to protect themselves, and these things are scary and they're bad, and there's that inherent separation again into the good and bad, and evil, etc. And what he's saying is, don't let that stop you from doing your own work.
Yeah.
Don't let that stop you from taking care of what's needed. And he also goes on to say, which I absolutely concur with, is that anything that arises, any phenomena that arises within awareness, within consciousness, it's all ultimately God.
Yes.
Everything is God. Even Donald Trump, bless him, he's just incredibly limited and ignorant and
Yeah.
acting out a lot of shit,
Bill
but
Gates, Bill
like,
Gates, he's the same.
It's the same. Like everything is ultimately God. And and that includes entities that you might perceive as, heavy, dark, evil, whatever. And the way to approach such things, and I speak from personal experience here to a degree, is when we know ourselves as that, as loving awareness, you could say, and if all things are that ultimately, right, is being able to simply love whatever arises. So if and when I encounter a non-corporeal entity, my job is to simply rest in loving awareness. And if fear arises, own that fear as mine, not
Mm,
that, you
mm,
see. So that the entity, bless it, is just revealing where there is still fear. So own the fear, feel the fear, and love whatever's showing up and attend to it as necessary. Attend to it as necessary, right? And so when I'm working with other humans, occasionally there is a sense of like, oh, what they're experiencing, what I'm sensing, could be seen through that particular lens or worldview, right? Recognizing that in, at different times, schizophrenia, that's a worldview. When we look at someone and say, oh, that person is schizophrenic, that's a worldview diagnosis. If they were in a different culture, they would be perceived in a different way. And sometimes they might be perceived as, oh, that person has a demon. Now, it's not about which worldview is right or wrong. The real question is, what does that person need to come into wholeness?
yes.
That's the real question, is what does that person need to come into wholeness? And maybe there are, healing methodologies from when the Western medical that can help, maybe. But maybe there's other things that could really help, right? And maybe working with a shaman who is able to hold loving awareness and do whatever can
Mm.
dissolve, and invite that particular entity to return to source. And there's a shift in that person's experience of reality. Like, I mean, it's such a big topic that you've
Yeah,
just
no,
opened, and you can feel all the different threads. And I'm like, oh, how do I keep this succinct? Yeah,
I love that
it's
distinction.
massive.
I love that distinction, and I love that reframe too on like what's the actual process that we need to take because of what I'm
Yeah.
experiencing. And the distinction, of course, between like, yeah, sure, there's a time and a place. Like I'm thinking of these plant medicine ceremonies that are
Hmm.
held really impeccably, and there's a lot
Hmm.
of prayers, and there's a energetic foundation that's set in the space before everybody comes in there so that everybody can be held. But also, I just love this notion of ultimately love being the medicine that can
Yeah.
purify all of these things. And
Yeah.
I'm just totally in alignment with that. I feel like that's the
Yeah.
thing. And even working with old patterns, it's like, love that
Yeah.
old pattern. Be the love that that
Oh my
pattern
God.
never got.
Totally. Absolutely. And there's discernment required. Like, occasionally go to nightclubs to dance with
Yes.
DJs, and after midnight is always interesting. After midnight's the witching hour, right? And that's when people are more likely to be more drunk, etc.
Yeah.
And when I'm moving around in the space, I will see what you could possibly describe as non-corporeal entities that may or not be attached or within a person. And I'm very mindful in terms of like, I'm just not going to engage there because I don't want to take responsibility for holding that and supporting it to return to source or whatever it might be, because I'm just out having fun right now,
Yeah.
you know? But it's well known in certain circles that anywhere where there's a lot of alcohol, the spirits come to feed. Um, and
Great
some of
example,
us,
right?
some of us
Alcohol,
can,
spirits. Yeah.
right? And some of us have the ability to perceive and sense this. And, I used to see it with my friends in my 20s. Sometimes when they would drink a certain amount, it was like there would be a switch and suddenly they weren't really them anymore.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, what has possessed them? And was it an entity, or was it just a shift in personality? Was it certain programming that got turned on? Again, different lenses to perceive what is happening. And the ultimate question is, what is needed to support this person in this?
I love it. I'm going to be a little bit selfish now because
Hmm.
I have always had this impulse to write a book, And maybe
Mm,
7 years ago, I was like, oh, I have to write this book. And then throughout my journey, it's kind of been like, why do I need to write a book? I can just point people in the direction of all these masters who have already written down this timeless wisdom in their life's work. But I keep getting this message, no, like my specific articulation, the way I'm articulating, the certain things that I'm pointing to, it's important. It's part of my path. It's part of my dharma. And I know you've written books. What is your
mhm.
advice to someone like myself who is an aspiring author and
Yeah.
wants to kind of jump into that? Because I know you've written multiple books, I think.
Yeah. I've probably written 7 or 8 to at least first draft stage, and I've published 3. And I think this is the important thing to recognize is when the urge to write a book arises, A, notice the mind generating the stories to keep you safe, which you've already done, you've already looked at them. And 2, recognize that don't confuse the urge to write a book with the results or the attainment of a particular thing.
Yes. Yeah.
So write the book with full surrender because maybe in the writing of the book, something happens that's necessary for you as the author. And what happens with the book after that is kind of none of your business,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
So you're
Like,
writing it for you, you're writing the channel, honoring the
yeah,
channel, and
yeah.
don't worry too much about all the outside stories.
The next step doesn't matter. And when it's written, then you tune in and wait to see, oh, what now? And it
Mm.
might be that that's it for now. Like I wrote a whole book on festival culture, 80 odd thousand words, and it's just sitting there. And it's even, I've even got, revisions that came in from beta readers, and it's just sitting there at this point. But the process of writing that did something extraordinary to me.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
can't know, what might happen for that down the line. And again, so just all we ever need to know is the next step. So honor the urge, show up to the page, do the writing, and then see what the next step after that might be.
Beautiful. I know we're coming to the end of this podcast. It's been
Mm.
incredible, by the way. I just love the different directions that we've gone in.
And so, if you're new to the path, let's look at it from that perspective.
Yeah.
If you're new to the path, what I would say is always be really skeptical of any teacher, right? Recognizing that all teachers are human. And whilst they may be able to transmit the teachings with a lot of purity at times, like within Tantra, the word guru simply means teacher. And guru is often, it's seen as a function, not a person. And this is a critical distinction to make. So when I'm teaching, I can drop into a very clear space and teach with a lot of clarity, etc. And also, I am a flawed human being with my own blind spots and my own shit and conditioning that I'm bringing as much awareness to and burning through as much as I can so I can be as clean and clear with my students as possible. But I'm no better. I'm not different
Mm.
from any of my students. I'm not superior in any way, shape, or form, right? The one that is in me is the one that is in you. We are ultimately, when you get into the center of it, the God that I am is the God that you are. And so to recognize if you're new to the path, there will be all kinds of conditioning that is running in you that is seeking mummy and seeking daddy. And basically,
Yeah.
and that shit's going to play out. And if you can catch any moment where you start to put a teacher or a musician or someone who's running a festival or you start to put them on a pedestal. Well, first, as soon as you do that, it's inevitable that at a certain point you're going to see something and you're going to be disappointed in that person, and then you're going to project your disappointment onto them, and they're going to fall off the pedestal, right?
That's right.
I'm like, don't pedestal me because then you're going to be disappointed in me, like, no, no. So
Yeah,
discernment
I
is
love that.
critical. Yeah. Recognize your own conditioning. Notice if you're starting to, we all do it. Like I'm very aware with my teachers. I know that my, mother wounds or father wounds will start to play out. But I've
Mm.
got to a point now where I will consciously engage with a specific teacher so that shit plays out, so I can catch it, so I can dissolve it. Right?
Yeah. I love where you took that. That's so cool. We're all a work in progress, right? We're all a work
Yeah.
in progress. One of my favorite Buddhist teachers is Trungpa Rinpoche,
Mm-hmm.
Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. He
Oh
wrote
yeah.
he wrote
The alcoholic
spiritual.
womanizer.
Yeah, exactly right. Who happened to be impeccably connected with Source since he was a young child, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he has all these.
And
He
love to
wrote.
fuck with people, right?
That's right. He loved to fuck with people.
Yep,
Yeah,
because he could see through it all. You're right. Like,
yeah.
yeah,
He wrote a
yeah.
book called Spiritual Materialism, and
Mm-hmm.
with every single teaching that he gave, he would always emphasize don't become like a spiritual person. Don't start grasping
Yeah.
onto any kind of idea that you're a spiritual being or anything like that. You're going to miss the boat if you do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just an interest and yeah, a very interesting story of a man who
Mm-hmm.
escaped Tibet from the Chinese and had this
Yeah.
impeccable lineage and then became an alcoholic and got a girlfriend and started smoking and drinking and stuff. It's like,
Totally. His wife, I think she was 16 when they met. He might have been 29 or 31 or
wow.
something. She wrote a story of her life with him, and
Mm,
that is a really fascinating read. And I think it's really important to recognize in terms of the spiritual path, there is nothing inherently moral about awakening. And
yeah.
so when we conflate or confuse, again, this is where the corruption of bringing in the conditioning of like Christianity into the path gets problematic. When we conflate or confuse that a spiritual teacher is going to be a good person, etc., with this idea of awakening, like, yeah, it's quite likely he had a certain degree of realization or awakening. And also how he showed up, his personality display, he chose to enjoy women, he chose to enjoy alcohol. And through a particular lens, that's seen as like wrong or bad. But again, it's the mixing up of the lenses and the views.
Yeah.
So it begs the question, is it possible to receive beneficial teachings from a teacher who appears to be morally corrupt in particular ways, right? And one thing that maybe it's Crystal Wallace, maybe I'm misattributing it. One thing that somebody says, a teaching I've heard, is that there are actually more than enough very clear, amazing teachers out there who do live more moral lives, that you don't need to worry about those teachers that might have been super awake but morally corrupt. Go to the ones that have both.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's a really interesting way to look at it. But from a just to reiterate this point, from the tantric perspective, the function of guru, right, which he displayed very well, is separate from the function of person. Two different things. So
Yeah.
don't confuse them. Don't confuse them.
Yeah, I love that distinction. And I do believe that we're living in a time where teachers are really important. People are seeking straightforward guidance and inspiration, and people are suffering. And
Yeah.
I think,
I mean, people have always suffered. This is just
yeah,
the ongoing wheel of samsara, and it's now the difference is that you get fed it on your news feed,
yeah.
on your handheld device in a way that you never did before.
Um,
Imagine the Holocaust being fed through your Instagram feed in the 40s. Oh wait, we don't need to. Gaza's happening. Like,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
like
That's the reality.
what? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Kara-Leah, where can people find you? What are some of the things that you're doing in the future? Like, if somebody
hmm
wants to connect with you more, like, tell us a bit more
Mm.
about that.
You can find me on Instagram and then also my website, Kara-Leah.com, no hyphen. I'm in the process of birthing through the embodied evolution of the direct realization Tantra that I taught for a
Mm,
number of years. And so this is Dancing the Dragon, which is it's bringing in the philosophy of Tantra in an embodied way and teaching people how to orientate to awareness and allow energy to move kundalini shakti so that the awakening, the liberation process, the purification process can spontaneously happen through your embodiment practice.
wow.
And yeah, like it's the synthesis of the way I've lived the path, the teachings, the practices, all of the things from the last 25 years. And that is just, that's why I'm just like so lit up and excited to bring this through and just really share this with people, because I know that this approach, it's deeply embodied, and it's also deeply grounded in the tantric texts and teachings. Yeah. Mm.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much again for this conversation. I always honor the opportunity to speak to a fellow yogi, someone that I can bounce off.
Yeah.
But also, you've really lit up some gold in my mind. There's a few things that you've said that have kind of like blown my mind a little bit. And it's like sometimes we're coming back to things that we already knew at a deeper level,
Yeah.
and that's that view, right? Like it just expands us just that little bit more. So thank you so much for all the gold that came out today. And yeah, maybe
Mm.
another time we can sit down again. I look forward to continuing to follow your journey in the world and see what you get up to.
Mm. Blessings, Kyle. Thank you so much. And just offering, like, oh my God, so much gratitude to my teachers and this
Mm,
path, and ultimately to tantric yoga, because where I would be without it, you know. Yeah. So blessings on the path, blessings on each one of you, and may all beings be free. Mm.
mm,
Yeah.
blessings.